Captain Daniel Carter stood on the bridge of the UNS Valiant and watched the holographic display with growing concern. The display showed 200 enemy ships moving toward human territory at high speed. These ships belonged to the Zelton race, a species known for their aggressive nature and their belief in strength above all else. Daniel had been in space combat before, but this felt different. The Zelton were not coming to negotiate or to explore. They were coming to conquer, and they had made their intentions very clear through their communications. 3 years ago, humanity had fought a terrible war against another alien empire called the Kresh. That war had lasted for 2 years and cost millions of lives on both sides. But when humanity finally gained the upper hand, they did something that shocked the entire galaxy. They offered mercy to their enemies. Human ships stopped firing when Kresh vessels surrendered. Human soldiers took prisoners instead of killing defeated enemies. Human medical teams even treated wounded Kresh warriors. The Galactic Council had praised humanity for their compassion and their adherence to the rules of civilized warfare. Admiral Linda Hayes stood beside Daniel on the bridge and watched the same display with cold eyes. She had commanded the human fleet during the final months of the Kresh War, and she had been the one to offer the terms of surrender that ended the conflict. Now she was facing a new enemy, and she knew that enemy had studied the Kresh War carefully. The Zelton believed they understood humanity now. They believed humans were soft and weak because they had shown mercy. Linda opened a communication channel to the approaching Zelton fleet. Her voice was calm and professional as she spoke. "This is Admiral Linda Hayes of the United Nations Space Command. You are entering protected human territory without authorization. We have no conflict with the Zelton people, and we do not wish to start one. Turn your fleet around and leave our space immediately. This is your only warning." The response came quickly, and it was exactly what Linda had feared. The face that appeared on the view screen was reptilian with golden eyes and scales that seemed to shimmer in the light. The Zelton commander spoke in perfect English, though his voice carried a hissing quality that made every word sound like a threat. "We have studied your previous war, human admiral. We have watched your ships in battle, and we have seen your weakness. You take prisoners. You follow rules. You show mercy to those who surrender. These things make you inferior warriors, and we will exploit every weakness you possess." Commander Jake Morrison, who served as Daniel's second-in-command, checked his tactical screen and looked up with alarm. "Captain, the Zelton fleet is not slowing down. They are increasing speed and their weapons are powering up. Sir, they are targeting Epsilon 7. Daniel felt his blood turn cold at those words. Epsilon 7 was not a military installation. It was a civilian colony station that housed 40,000 people. There were families there and children and elderly citizens. His own sister Claire lived on Epsilon 7 with her 2 young children. The station had defensive shields, but they were designed to protect against accidents and small debris, not against a full military assault from 200 warships. Linda Hayes looked at Daniel and saw the fear in his eyes. She understood that fear because she had family on that station too, but fear could not be allowed to control their decisions. She turned back to the view screen where the Zelton commander was still visible, and she spoke again. "Commander, you are making a grave mistake. If you attack that civilian station, you will force us to respond with overwhelming force. We showed mercy to the Kresh because they honored the rules of war. They did not target civilians. They did not attack defenseless stations. If you break those rules, then you will face a very different version of humanity." The Zelton commander laughed, and the sound was harsh and mocking. "Your mercy is your greatest weakness, human. You care too much about individual lives. You hesitate when you should strike. You hold back when you should destroy. We do not share your weakness, and we will teach you what real warfare looks like." The communication cut off abruptly, and the Zelton fleet continued its advance toward Epsilon 7. Daniel turned to his tactical officer. "Get me a direct line to all ship captains in the fleet. I need to speak to everyone right now." Within seconds, the communication system connected him to the commanders of all 50 human ships that were positioned to defend this sector of space. 50 ships against 200 seemed like impossible odds, but Daniel knew something the Zelton did not know. He looked at the faces of his fellow captains on the smaller view screens around the bridge. These were men and women he had served with for years. They had fought together against the Kresh, and they had celebrated together when that war ended. Now they faced a new threat, and this threat had just made a terrible mistake. You all heard the Zelton commander. They are targeting Epsilon 7, And they believe our mercy makes us weak. They think because we chose to show compassion to the Kresh that we are incapable of fighting without restraint. Captain Nicole Shaw, who commanded the cruiser UNS Hurricane, spoke up from her screen. "What are your orders, Captain Carter?" Her voice was steady, but Daniel could see the anger in her eyes. Nicole had 3 brothers living on Epsilon 7, and she was clearly ready to fight. Daniel looked at Admiral Hayes, who gave him a small nod of approval. Then he looked back at the assembled captains and spoke clearly. "During the Kresh War, we followed strict rules of engagement. We disabled enemy ships instead of destroying them. We gave enemies time to surrender. We held back our most powerful weapons because we wanted to win with honor. But the Zelthon have just told us they do not care about honor or rules or civilian lives. They have chosen to attack defenseless people to prove a point." He paused and let his words sink in before continuing. "Admiral Hayes is about to give an order that we have not heard since the weapons testing phase before the Kresh War. When she gives that order, we will stop holding back. We will show the Zelthon and the entire galaxy why humanity chose to show mercy before. We chose mercy because we are strong enough to choose it. We chose mercy because we wanted to prove we could win without becoming monsters. But when someone attacks our families and our civilians, then we stop choosing mercy." Linda Hayes stepped forward, and her voice carried across all 50 ships when she spoke. "All vessels, this is Admiral Hayes. You are authorized to engage Protocol Omega. All weapons restrictions are lifted. All tactical limitations are removed. Show them what we chose not to show the Kresh. Show them what our mercy was protecting them from." The bridge of the Valiant went quiet for a moment as everyone processed those words. Protocol Omega was the designation for unrestricted warfare, using every weapon system humanity had developed. These weapons had been tested and proven effective, but they had been locked away after the Galactic Council expressed concern about their destructive power. Humanity had agreed to restrict their use to only the most extreme circumstances. The deliberate targeting of a civilian station qualified as an extreme circumstance. Daniel watched as the Zelthon fleet opened fire on Epsilon 7. Brilliant. Flashes of plasma and energy weapons struck the station's shields, and he could see the power readings starting to drop. The shields would hold for maybe 20 minutes under this kind of sustained assault. After that, the station's hull would be exposed and 40,000 lives would be at risk. He turned to his weapons officer. "Lock all weapons on the nearest Zelthon vessels. Prepare to fire on my command." The officer's hands moved quickly across the control panel, and Daniel saw the weapons status change from standby to active. These were not the same weapons they had used against the Kresh. These were the classified systems that most of the galaxy had never seen in actual combat. The Zelthon were about to learn a hard lesson about the difference between mercy and weakness. They were about to discover that humanity had not shown mercy to the Kresh because they had to. They had shown mercy because they chose to. And now that choice was being taken away. Admiral Hayes looked at the tactical display one more time and then gave the order that would change everything. "All ships engage. Protect Epsilon 7 at all costs. No mercy." Lieutenant Amy Pierce sat in the cockpit of her fighter and felt her hands grip the controls tighter than usual. She was part of Phoenix Squadron, which consisted of 30 of the best pilots in the human fleet. Behind her cockpit, she could feel the new weapon systems humming with power and waiting to be unleashed. These were not the standard missiles and energy weapons that had been used against the Kresh. These were the weapons that had been classified as too dangerous for conventional warfare. But now the restrictions were gone, and Amy knew exactly what that meant. Her communication system crackled to life, and Commander Jake Morrison's voice came through clear and urgent. "Phoenix Squadron, this is Morrison. You are cleared for full engagement. All doctrine restrictions have been lifted. Repeat, all restrictions are lifted. Protect Epsilon 7 and destroy any hostile vessels that threaten civilian lives." Amy took a deep breath and activated her fighter's main systems. The targeting computer lit up with options she had only seen during classified training simulations. During the Kresh War, her targets had been limited to enemy weapons systems and engines. The goal had been to disable ships, not destroy them. Now her targeting computer was showing her bridge sections and life support systems and reactor cores. These were kill shots, and the computer was recommending them as primary targets. She pushed her fighter forward and accelerated toward the Zelthon formation. Around her, the other 29 fighters of Phoenix Squadron moved in perfect coordination. They had trained together for 3 years, and each pilot knew exactly where the others would be at any given moment. This coordination had been impressive during the Kresh War, but now it became something far more deadly. The first Zelthon ship that came into her range was a destroyer roughly twice the size of her fighter. During the Kresh War, she would have targeted its engines and tried to disable it. Now she locked her weapons onto the bridge section and fired without hesitation. The missile that left her fighter moved faster than anything the Kresh had ever seen. It was a new design that used a miniature reactor to maintain acceleration all the way to impact. The Zelthon destroyer's shields flickered for a moment and then collapsed under the sustained energy output. The missile struck the bridge and detonated with enough force to vaporize the entire front section of the ship. Amy did not wait to see the results. She was already moving toward her next target and her wingman was covering her approach. The Zelthon were trying to adapt to the human attack, but they were too slow. Their ships were built for traditional combat where vessels exchanged fire at medium range and tried to outlast each other. The human fighters did not fight that way. They moved fast and struck hard, and they did not give their enemies time to respond. Captain Greg Bailey commanded the destroyer UNS Retribution, and he watched the fighter attack with grim satisfaction. His ship was positioned closer to Epsilon 7, and his job was to provide a defensive screen against any Zelthon vessels that got past the fighters. On his tactical display, he could see the Zelthon formation starting to break apart as human fighters tore through their ranks. But there were still too many enemy ships, and some of them were getting through. His weapons officer, Lieutenant Sam Cooper, looked up from his station with wide eyes. "Captain, the Nova Lance is fully charged and ready to fire. We have a clear shot at that Zelthon battlecruiser on Vector 9. The Nova Lance was the Retribution's primary weapon, and it had been installed after the Kresh War ended. The weapon had never been used in actual combat because it was considered too powerful for conventional warfare. It drew power directly from the ship's main reactor and focused it into a beam of pure energy." Greg looked at the battlecruiser on his screen. The ship was 3 times the size of his destroyer, and it was moving toward Epsilon 7 with clear hostile intent. He thought about the families on that station, and he thought about the Zelthon commander's words about mercy being weakness. Then he gave the order, "Fire the Nova Lance." The Retribution's main reactor surged as massive amounts of power were redirected to the weapon. For a moment, every other system on the ship dimmed slightly. Then a beam of white energy erupted from the Retribution's bow and crossed the distance to the Zelthon battlecruiser in less than a second. The beam struck the enemy ship in the center and did not just penetrate the hull. It carved through the entire vessel from front to back like a hot knife through paper. The battlecruiser broke into 2 pieces and both halves exploded moments later as their reactors lost containment. Sam stared at his screen in shock. "Captain, that was a single shot. We just destroyed a battlecruiser with 1 shot." Greg nodded slowly and felt no satisfaction in the destruction. This was not glorious combat or honorable warfare. This was extermination, and it was necessary because the Zelthon had chosen to threaten civilians. On the command ship, UNS Defiance Admiral Linda Hayes watched the battle unfold across dozens of screens. Each screen showed data from different ships in the human fleet, and together they gave her a complete picture of the battlefield. The Zelthon had entered this battle with 200 ships and overwhelming numerical superiority. Now, after just 15 minutes of combat, they had lost 30 vessels and the human fleet had not lost a single ship. Her tactical officer reported the status updates in a calm, professional voice. "Epsilon 7's shields are holding at 40%. The Zelthon attack on the station has weakened as more enemy ships divert to engage our forces. Phoenix Squadron reports 18 confirmed kills with 0 losses. Guardian Squadron is moving to intercept a flanking group of Zelthon vessels approaching from Sector 7. Linda processed all this information and made her decisions quickly. During the Kresh War, she had commanded her fleet with careful consideration for minimizing casualties on both sides. She had given enemies time to surrender, and she had made sure her ships followed strict rules of engagement. Now she commanded with only one goal, which was to eliminate every threat to Epsilon 7 as quickly as possible. She opened a communication channel to all ships. "This is Admiral Hayes. The Zelthon fleet is attempting to regroup. Do not give them that opportunity. Maintain aggressive pursuit and destroy any vessel that does not immediately power down all weapons and surrender. And understand this clearly. Even if they try to surrender now, we may not accept it. They fired on civilians and they will face the consequences of that choice." Captain Daniel Carter listened to the Admiral's words and felt a cold determination settle over him. His sister had sent him a brief message from Epsilon 7, saying that she and the children were in the reinforced core section of the station, and they were safe for now. But safe for now was not good enough. He needed to make sure they stayed safe permanently, and that meant eliminating the Zelthon threat completely. His helmsman called out a warning. Captain, 3 Zelthon frigates are moving to flank us. They are trying to get behind our formation. Daniel looked at his tactical screen and saw the enemy ships attempting a maneuver that would have been effective against the Kresh, but the Valiant's AI system had already calculated the enemy movement and prepared a counter. Execute, evasive pattern Delta and bring us about, target their lead ship with all forward batteries. The Valiant turned with grace that seemed impossible for a ship of its size. The human vessels used gravity manipulation technology that the Kresh had never possessed, and the Zelthon clearly did not understand. Where a traditional ship would have needed minutes to complete such a turn, the Valiant did it in seconds. The Zelthon frigates found themselves facing the Valiant's full weapons array instead of its vulnerable rear section. Daniel gave the order to fire, and the results were immediate. Railguns launched projectiles at incredible speeds, and each impact released enough kinetic energy to punch through shields and armor. Laser batteries carved precise lines across enemy hulls and found critical systems. Missile pods released smart munitions that dodged point defense fire and struck with devastating accuracy. All 3 Zelthon frigates were destroyed in less than 30 seconds. Daniel felt no triumph in their destruction, only a grim acceptance that this was necessary. The Zelthon had declared they followed no rules and showed no mercy. Humanity was simply meeting them at the level they had chosen. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out again and again. Human ships moved with coordination that seemed almost telepathic, because their AI systems were all linked in a combat network. Every ship knew where every other ship would be several moves ahead. Every captain could see the entire battlefield and make decisions based on complete information. The Zelthon fought as individual vessels with individual captains making isolated decisions. They never had a chance against humanity's networked approach to warfare. Lieutenant Amy Pierce destroyed her 5th Zelthon ship and checked her fuel and ammunition levels. She still had enough for at least another hour of combat. Around her, the other Phoenix Squadron pilots were reporting similar success rates. The Zelthon pilots were brave, but they were not trained for this kind of fighting. They expected honor and rules and predictable patterns. The humans gave them none of those things. A new voice came over the squadron channel, and Amy recognized it as belonging to Captain Nicole Shaw of the Hurricane.
Phoenix Squadron, this is Shaw. I need you to clear a path through the...
High Warrior Zekros stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched his fleet die. The tactical display showed red markers where his ships had been just minutes ago, and those markers were disappearing one by one. He had entered human space with 200 vessels and absolute confidence in his victory. Now he was watching that confidence crumble along with his fleet. In 20 minutes of combat, he had lost 40 ships and the humans had lost nothing. Not a single human vessel had been destroyed or even seriously damaged. His second-in-command approached with fear visible in every movement. High Warrior. The humans are not fighting the way we expected. They are not following any of the patterns we studied from their war with the Kresh. Their weapons are different and their tactics are completely different. We cannot adapt quickly enough to counter them. Zekros wanted to rage at the incompetence of his officers, but he knew the failure was his own. He had studied the recordings of human combat against the Kresh, and he had seen ships that disabled rather than destroyed. He had seen boarding parties that took prisoners rather than killing defeated crews. He had seen medical ships that treated enemy wounded. All of this had convinced him that humans were weak and soft and could not fight a real war. But the ships attacking his fleet now showed none of that restraint. These human vessels struck with surgical precision, and they aimed to kill, not disable. Their fighters moved faster than anything he had ever seen, and their capital ships wielded weapons that could destroy a battlecruiser with a single shot. This was not the fleet that had fought the Kresh. This was something else entirely. He made a decision that would have been unthinkable an hour ago. All ships fall back to defensive formation. Concentrate our fire on their command vessel. If we can destroy their admiral, perhaps we can break their coordination. It was a desperate move, but desperation was all he had left. His officers transmitted the orders, and the remaining Zelthon ships began to regroup. But the humans did not have a traditional command structure. Admiral Hayes commanded from the Defiance, But every captain was empowered to make independent tactical decisions. When 50 Zelthon ships turned their weapons toward the Defiance, the other human vessels did not rush to defend it. Instead, they pressed their attack on the now weakened Zelthon formation and exploited every opening. Captain Nicole Shaw saw the Zelthon formation shift and immediately recognized the mistake they were making. The Hurricane was perfectly positioned to strike at the gap they had created. She gave orders quickly, and her crew responded with the efficiency that came from years of training. Helm, bring us through that opening in their formation. Weapons, prepare full broadside. Target every ship we pass and fire as fast as you can reload. The Hurricane dove into the Zelthon formation like a shark moving through a school of fish. Her weapons blazed continuously as she passed within striking distance of a dozen enemy ships. Railguns fired solid projectiles at speeds that made them impossible to intercept. Each round carried kinetic energy equivalent to a small nuclear weapon, and the Hurricane was firing 12 rounds per second from each of her 6 railguns. The math was brutal and simple. 72 nuclear-level impacts per second concentrated on whatever targets came into range. 3 Zelthon destroyers simply ceased to exist in the span of 30 seconds. Their shields collapsed under the sustained bombardment and their hulls disintegrated into expanding clouds of debris. Nicole felt no satisfaction in their destruction. This was not the kind of combat she had trained for or wanted. But the Zelthon had made their choice when they fired on Epsilon 7. Commander Jake Morrison led a mixed force of fighters and corvettes toward the flanking group of Zelthon ships that was still trying to reach the civilian station. His corvette, the UNS Swift, was small compared to the enemy cruisers, but it was fast and maneuverable. Behind him, 60 fighters from both Phoenix and Guardian squadrons moved in perfect coordination. They had one mission, which was to protect Epsilon 7 at any cost. The Zelthon commander of the flanking force saw the human ships approaching and made a fatal error in judgment. He assumed the smaller human vessels would be easy targets for his larger cruisers. He ordered his ships to maintain course and prepare to fire on the station. This decision gave Morrison exactly the opening he needed. All ships engage at will. Priority targets are their weapon systems and engines. Let us disable them first, and if they continue to threaten the station, then we destroy them. Morrison's orders reflected the training that all human officers received. Even in unrestricted combat, they were supposed to give enemies a chance to stop fighting. But that chance was only offered once. Lieutenant Amy Pierce targeted the sensor array on the nearest Zelthon cruiser. The array was a cluster of sophisticated equipment mounted on the ship's dorsal surface, and it was relatively fragile compared to the armored hull. Her missile struck with precision, and the entire array exploded in a shower of sparks and debris. The Zelthon ship immediately went blind and started broadcasting distress signals. 2 other fighters from her squadron saw the opening and exploited it ruthlessly. With no sensors, the Zelthon cruiser could not track incoming threats or coordinate its defensive systems. Missiles found vulnerable points in the hull and penetrated deep into the ship's interior. The cruiser's reactor containment failed, and the resulting explosion lit up the darkness of space. Morrison coordinated the defense with mechanical efficiency. His tactical display showed him the position of every friendly ship and every enemy vessel. His AI system calculated trajectories and weapons effectiveness and suggested targets. But the final decisions were still made by human judgment. Guardian Squadron, execute pattern Delta. Phoenix Squadron, keep them off balance. Do not let them establish any kind of defensive coordination. The Zelthon ships tried to adapt to the human attack patterns, but they were too slow. Their tactics were built for conventional warfare, where ships faced each other at medium range and exchanged volleys of fire. The humans refused to fight that way. They stayed in constant motion and struck from unexpected angles, and never gave the enemy time to organize a proper defense. One Zelthon captain made a desperate decision to ram Morrison's corvette. If he could not defeat the human ship with weapons, then perhaps he could destroy it through collision. The massive Zelthon cruiser turned toward the Swift and accelerated to maximum speed. For a moment, it looked like the collision was inevitable. Then Morrison adjusted his course by just a few degrees, and the Zelthon ship found itself passing within meters of his corvette but not making contact. What the Zelthon captain did not realize was that his maneuver had put his ship directly in the path of the UNS Hurricane. Captain Nicole Shaw saw the enemy cruiser appear on her tactical screen, and she did not hesitate. Main batteries fire. The Hurricane's most powerful weapons discharged simultaneously. and the Zelthon cruiser was struck by enough concentrated energy to vaporize a small moon. The ship broke apart into glowing fragments that tumbled through space. Back on Epsilon 7 station, Director Paul Martinez watched the battle through the station's external cameras. The shields were holding at 35%, which meant they could withstand maybe another 10 minutes of sustained fire. But the Zelthon attack on the station had weakened considerably as more enemy ships diverted to fight the human fleet. He opened a communication channel to Captain Carter. "Captain, this is Martinez. Our shields are stabilizing. Whatever you are doing out there, it is working. Keep those bastards away from us." Daniel received the message with relief, but he knew the battle was far from over. The Zelthon still had over 150 ships operational, and they were beginning to regroup. High Warrior Zekros was attempting to rally his forces for one final coordinated assault. The tactical display showed the enemy formation tightening up and preparing for a concentrated push toward the human fleet's position. Admiral Hayes studied the same tactical data and made her assessment. "They are going to try to overwhelm us with numbers. All ships prepare for close quarters combat. Captain Carter, you have operational command of the fleet's left wing. Captain Shaw, you have the right wing. I will command the center. We are going to meet their charge head-on and we are going to break them." The human fleet adjusted its formation in response to the Admiral's orders. 50 ships positioned themselves to receive the charge of over 150 Zelthon vessels. By any traditional calculation, the humans were still badly outnumbered. But traditional calculations did not account for the quality of training or the sophistication of technology or the motivation of the crews. The Zelthon were fighting because their High Warrior had ordered them to attack and because retreat would bring dishonor. The humans were fighting to protect 40,000 civilians who could not protect themselves. There was a fundamental difference between those two motivations, and that difference would decide the outcome of the battle. Daniel watched the enemy fleet approach on his tactical display. The Zelthon ships were moving in a tight formation, designed to concentrate their firepower on a small section of the human line. It was a sound strategy in theory. If they could overwhelm one section of the human fleet, then they could roll up the entire line. But the strategy assumed the humans would stand still and accept the charge. The human fleet reformed around the scattered Zelthon formation like predators encircling prey. What had been a coordinated enemy charge turned into chaos as individual Zelthon ships found themselves isolated and surrounded. Captain Daniel Carter watched his tactical display and saw the pattern clearly. The Zelthon had committed everything to one massive assault, and when that assault failed to connect, they lost all cohesion. The UN's Valiant shuddered as several Zelthon plasma bolts struck her shields, but the defensive systems held easily. These were military-grade shields designed to withstand sustained combat, and the scattered enemy fire was not enough to threaten them. Daniel gave his orders calmly. "Return fire. All batteries concentrate on the nearest heavy cruiser. Let us remove their biggest ships from the battlefield first." The Valiant's weapons lit up the darkness as railguns and energy weapons discharged simultaneously. The targeted Zelthon cruiser attempted to evade, but it was too large and too slow. Multiple impacts cratered its hull and penetrated deep into the ship's interior. Critical systems failed one by one. Life support, navigation, weapons control. Within 2 minutes, the cruiser was a drifting hulk and its crew was frantically broadcasting surrender signals. But Daniel had not forgotten Admiral Hayes's earlier statement. The Zelthon had fired on civilians and surrender might not be accepted. He checked the threat assessment and confirmed the cruiser was no longer capable of fighting. "Cease fire on that target. Move to the next threat." The disabled cruiser would be dealt with later if it survived the battle. Right now, there were still active threats that needed to be eliminated. Captain Lisa Morgan commanded the assault ship UNS Reaper, and she watched the battle with the cold calculation of someone who specialized in boarding actions. Her ship was smaller than a battleship, but it carried 300 combat Marines in powered armor. During the Kresh War, those Marines had been used to accept surrenders and secure captured vessels. Now they had a different mission. "Captain, we have multiple Zelthon ships with collapsed shields and damaged hulls. They are vulnerable to boarding action." Her tactical officer highlighted 3 enemy vessels on the display. Each one was a valuable target that could be captured rather than destroyed. But capture meant risking the lives of Marines in close quarters combat. Lisa made her decision based on cold logic. The Zelthon had declared they followed no rules and showed no mercy. They had targeted civilians. Her Marines were trained professionals who understood the risks. Launch boarding pods. Target the 3 disabled vessels. Secure their engineering sections and take control of their reactors. If any Zelthon crew resist, then neutralize them. 12 boarding pods launched from the Reaper. Each pod was essentially a heavily armored missile containing 10 Marines in full combat gear. Magnetic accelerators hurled the pods toward their targets at incredible speeds. Point defense systems on the Zelthon ships tried to intercept, but most of the guns had been damaged in the initial assault. 9 pods reached their targets and punched through weakened hulls like bullets through paper. Sergeant Kyle Bennett led 3rd Squad into the engineering section of a Zelthon dreadnought. The pod's impact had created a breach in the hull, and emergency force fields had sealed the area to prevent decompression. His Marines moved through the breach in perfect formation with weapons ready and sensors scanning for threats. The interior of the Zelthon ship was dimly lit and smelled of chemicals that burned his nose even through the armor's filters. Contacts ahead, multiple hostiles moving to intercept. The warning came from his point man, and Kyle immediately directed his squad to take defensive positions. The Zelthon crew that appeared moments later were large reptilian beings with natural armor plating and obvious physical strength. They carried weapons that looked crude but deadly. In a fair fight between unarmored opponents, the Zelthon would have significant advantages. But this was not a fair fight. Kyle's Marines wore powered armor that enhanced their strength tenfold and provided protection against most small arms fire. Their weapons were designed to penetrate ship hulls, not just organic targets. When the first Zelthon warrior raised his weapon, Kyle's squad opened fire, and the results were immediate and brutal. The high-velocity rounds punched through Zelthon armor and bodies with equal ease. Advance to the reactor room. Clear every compartment. Watch for ambushes. Kyle led his squad deeper into the ship and encountered resistance at every turn. The Zelthon crew fought bravely, but they were outmatched by superior training and equipment. Within 8 minutes, 3rd Squad had secured the engineering section and established control over the ship's reactor. Similar actions were taking place on the other boarded vessels. Human Marines moved through Zelthon ships like ghosts and struck with lethal efficiency. During the Kresh War, boarding parties had been careful to minimize casualties and take prisoners whenever possible. Now they moved with one goal, which was to secure strategic locations as quickly as possible, regardless of enemy losses. Captain Nicole Shaw guided the Hurricane through the chaos of close combat and searched for high-value targets. Her tactical officer identified one immediately. Captain, the Zelthon command ship is attempting to retreat. It is moving away from the main battle, and its escort has been reduced to only 4 vessels. Nicole made her decision instantly. Helm, pursue that command ship. Weapons, prepare a full spread of torpedoes. We are going to remove their leadership from this battle permanently. The Hurricane broke away from the main engagement and accelerated after the fleeing Zelthon flagship. 4 escort ships moved to intercept, but they were outnumbered by the fighters that followed the Hurricane. Lieutenant Amy Pierce saw the escort ships moving and adjusted her course to intercept. Phoenix Squadron, those escorts are trying to protect their command ship. We need to keep them busy while the Hurricane makes her attack run. 30 fighters swarmed around the 4 Zelthon escorts and turned the space around them into a deadly maze of weapons fire and high speed. Maneuvering, the escorts tried to maintain formation and protect their flagship, but human fighters were everywhere. Every time a Zelthon gunner locked onto one fighter, 2 more would appear from a different angle. The escort's point defense systems were overwhelmed by the sheer number of targets, and missiles began finding their way through to strike vulnerable points on the hulls. Nicole watched the tactical display as her fighters kept the escorts occupied. The Zelthon flagship was less than a minute away at current speeds. Weapons, fire all torpedo tubes. Saturate their defensive systems. 24 torpedoes launched from the Hurricane and spread out in a pattern designed to overwhelm any point defense network. The Zelthon flagship's guns opened fire and managed to destroy 16 of the incoming weapons, but 8 got through. Each torpedo that struck the Zelthon flagship carried a warhead powerful enough to crack the hull of a battleship. 8 simultaneous impacts along the ship's midsection created a cascade of internal explosions. Secondary detonations rippled through the vessel as fuel lines ruptured and ammunition stores cooked off. The flagship broke into 3 large pieces that tumbled through space, trailing debris and frozen atmosphere. High Warrior Zekros died in the initial torpedo impacts and never knew his fleet had lost. With his death and the destruction of the command ship, the Zelthon formation completely fell apart. Individual ship captains found themselves in command of vessels that had no coordination with their neighbors, and no clear orders about what to do next. Some tried to continue fighting, others attempted to retreat. A few transmitted surrender signals. Admiral Linda Hayes watched from the Defiance as the enemy fleet disintegrated. This was the moment when the battle could end. The Zelthon were broken and leaderless, and many were trying to surrender. During the Kresh War, she would have immediately ordered a ceasefire and begun accepting those surrenders. But the Zelthon had targeted civilians and declared they followed no rules. She had to make a decision about how humanity would respond. She opened a communication channel to Captain Carter. "Daniel, what is the status of Epsilon 7? The response came quickly. "Admiral, the station reports shields are stable at 28%. All civilians are accounted for, and there have been 17 confirmed casualties from the initial attack. The station is no longer in immediate danger. 17 dead. 17 people who had been living peaceful lives on a civilian station and who had died because an alien race decided to test humanity's resolve." Linda thought about those 17 lives, and she thought about the hundreds of Zelthon warriors who were now trying to surrender. During her career, she had always believed in showing mercy to defeated enemies. She had built her reputation on compassion and restraint, but she also believed in consequences. The Zelthon had been warned. They had been given every opportunity to turn back. They had chosen to attack anyway, and they had chosen to target civilians. If humanity accepted their surrender now without exacting a price, then what message would that send to the next aggressive species that tested human resolve? She made her decision and knew it would haunt her for the rest of her life. "All ships, this is Admiral Hayes. Continue the attack. Any Zelthon vessel that powers down all weapons and maintains a stationary position will be spared. Any vessel that attempts to flee or maintain." 3 hours after the first shots were fired, the battle ended. Captain Daniel Carter walked through the corridors of the UNS Valiant and checked on his crew. The ship had taken damage during the fight, but nothing critical. His crew was tired but alive. In the medical bay, he found 6 wounded personnel being treated by the ship's doctors. None of the injuries were life-threatening, and all 6 would make full recoveries. He continued his walk and found himself in the observation deck where several off-duty crew members were staring out at the debris field that had been the Zelthon fleet. 200 ships had entered human space with aggressive intent. Now the space around Epsilon 7 was filled with wreckage and bodies, and the shattered remains of alien vessels. Of the original 200 ships, only 35 remained intact. Those 35 had surrendered and were now under guard by human vessels. The rest had been destroyed. Commander Jake Morrison joined Daniel at the observation window. "Captain, the final casualty reports are in. Across the entire fleet, we lost 347 personnel. 12 ships took significant damage, but all are repairable. Epsilon 7 reports 17 civilian casualties from the initial attack." Daniel nodded slowly and absorbed those numbers. 364 humans dead total, against several thousand Zelthon warriors who would never go home. Was it worth it, Jake? All those lives lost on both sides? The question came out before Daniel could stop himself. Morrison was quiet for a long moment before answering. "The Zelthon chose this, Captain. We gave them every warning and every chance to turn back. They decided to test whether our mercy was weakness. They found out it was not. Admiral Linda Hayes called a meeting of all ship captains once the immediate aftermath was managed. The meeting took place via holographic communication with each captain, appearing as a 3-dimensional image on the Defiance's bridge. 50 faces looked at Hayes and waited for her to speak. These were the men and women who had commanded the ships that destroyed the Zelthon fleet. These were the people who would have to live with what they had done. Today we reminded the galaxy of something important. Mercy is not weakness. Mercy is a choice that we make when our enemies deserve it. The Kresh received our mercy because they followed the rules of civilized warfare. They did not target civilians. They accepted surrender when offered. They treated their prisoners with basic dignity. The Zelthon did none of those things. Hayes paused and looked at each captain in turn. They declared they had no honor and no rules. We took them at their word. Captain Nicole Shaw spoke up. "Admiral, what about the Galactic Council? They are going to demand an explanation for why we used prohibited weapons, and why we showed no mercy to enemies trying to surrender." Other captains nodded at this concern. Humanity had agreements with the Council about weapon restrictions and rules of engagement. Hayes had already considered this problem. We will show them the recordings of the Zelthon attack on Epsilon 7. We will show them our multiple warnings and our attempts at peaceful resolution. We will demonstrate that we followed every protocol right up until the moment the Zelthon opened fire on a civilian station, and we will make it absolutely clear that humanity will honor the rules of war with those who honor them. But when someone declares they have no rules, then we will meet them at that level. The discussion continued for another hour as captains raised concerns and Hayes addressed each one. Finally, the meeting ended and the captains returned to their ships. Daniel Carter sat alone in his ready room and composed a message to his sister Claire on Epsilon 7. His fingers moved slowly across the keyboard as he searched for the right words. It is over. You are safe. The Zelthon fleet has been destroyed and the survivors are in custody. I know you and the children were terrified and I am sorry you had to go through that. We did everything we could to protect the station. Please give the kids a hug from their uncle and tell them they are safe now. Claire's response came within minutes. Thank you, Danny. The kids are asking questions about the battle and about why the aliens attacked us. What should I tell them? Daniel stared at that question for a long time before answering. Tell them that sometimes bad people make bad choices. Tell them that we tried to solve the problem peacefully, but the other side would not listen. Tell them that their family will always protect them no matter what. 2 weeks later, Ambassador Helen Foster stood before the Galactic Council in the massive chamber on the neutral station that served as the Council's headquarters. Representatives from over 100 species filled the chamber, and all of them were focused on her. The human ambassador wore a simple suit and carried herself with quiet dignity as she prepared to address the assembled aliens. The Council's speaker was a being named Harosh, whose crystalline body refracted light in patterns that indicated his emotional state. Currently, those patterns showed concern and uncertainty. Ambassador Foster, the Council has reviewed the recordings of the incident at Epsilon 7. We have also reviewed the casualty reports and the weapon usage logs from human vessels. Your species used weapons that were classified as restricted, and you showed minimal mercy to a defeated enemy. Please explain these actions. Helen had prepared for this moment carefully. She activated a holographic display that showed the timeline of events leading up to the battle. The Zelthon fleet entered human space without authorization. We transmitted multiple warnings and gave them every opportunity to withdraw peacefully. They responded by declaring they followed no rules and by opening fire on a civilian station containing 40,000 people, including children and elderly citizens. She let that statement hang in the air for a moment before continuing. The weapons we used are indeed powerful. We agreed to restrict their use to extreme circumstances. The deliberate targeting of a civilian station qualifies as an extreme circumstance. As for mercy, we offered the Zelthon the same mercy we offered the Kresh. We allowed any vessel that completely surrendered to survive. 35 Zelton ships accepted those terms and their crews are alive today. A representative from a species called the Vorn spoke up, but you destroyed over 150 ships. Many of those ships were trying to surrender. Helen turned to face the Vorn representative and her voice became cold. They were trying to surrender after they had already fired on civilians. They were trying to surrender after they had killed 17 innocent people. They were trying to surrender when they realized they could not win. That is not the same as genuine surrender, and we were under no obligation to accept it. Harosh's crystalline form shifted through several color patterns as he processed this information. Ambassador Foster, the Council must ask a direct question. Will this be humanity's standard response to all future conflicts? The entire chamber went quiet as everyone waited for her answer. Helen smiled, and there was something in that smile that made several representatives shift uncomfortably. No, Speaker Harosh. This was our response to an enemy who deliberately targeted civilians after being warned. To enemies who follow the rules of civilized warfare, humanity will continue to show mercy. We will disable rather than destroy when possible. We will accept genuine surrenders. We will treat prisoners with dignity and provide medical care to wounded enemies. She paused and let her smile fade. But to those who choose to ignore those rules, to those who target civilians, to those who declare they have no honor, we will respond with overwhelming force. We showed the Kresh what humanity looks like when we choose restraint. We showed the Zelthon what humanity looks like when that choice is taken away. Consider this battle our final warning to the galaxy. The council chambers erupted in discussions as representatives debated among themselves. Some argued that humanity had overreacted. Others pointed out that the Zeltan had initiated the conflict and targeted civilians. The debate continued for hours, but eventually a vote was called. The council ruled that humanity's actions were justified under the circumstances. The Zeltan were officially censured for initiating hostilities and violating the prohibition against targeting civilian populations. A new entry was added to humanity's file in the Galactic Registry. The entry was brief but carried significant weight. Species demonstrates capacity for both extraordinary mercy and extraordinary violence. Approach with diplomatic intent. Honor established rules of warfare. Do not target civilian populations. Species will provide opportunity for peaceful resolution, but will not provide second chances once rules are broken. Back on Earth, Captain Daniel Carter attended a memorial service for the crew members who had died during the defense of Epsilon 7. He stood with other captains and with Admiral Hayes and with families of the fallen. The service was held at a military cemetery, and 347 names were added to the memorial wall. Each name represented a person who had died protecting those who could not protect themselves. When it was his turn to speak, Daniel kept his words simple and honest. We are gathered here to honor people who made the ultimate sacrifice. They died defending a civilian station. They died protecting families and children, and people who had done nothing to deserve attack. That is what we do. That is who we are as humans. We show mercy when we can. We show strength when we must. And we never abandon our own.